Hey scholars, Professor Denham here. This is a PowerPoint lecture video for Chapter 1 of our course textbook on arguing, reasoning, and thinking well. Hopefully you have that book by now. As you know, I've provided the first chapter of this textbook available on our course page. So if you don't yet have your book, you can use that copy of the Chapter 1 until you get your book. It's, in my opinion, a lot easier to read in the actual textbook because textbook. Anyhow, so this is our first PowerPoint lecture for this course, for this book. First thing I want to point out is how you would approach reading a textbook. Some of you, it's your first semester in college. Some of you, you've been in college for a long time. Most of you have read textbooks a number of times. But what I want to share with you is one of the best ways, in my opinion, from my experience, especially in grad school when I had massive amounts of reading to do on a regular basis. I had to learn how to read a lot more efficiently. So before you read any textbook or any academic book or any book in general, but specifically, the academic books and scholarly books and stuff, that's a lot more dense and meaty and heady and thick, tough to get through. One of the best ways to approach it is to do a warm-up. If you ever played sports or some sort of physical exercise, you know that it's really, really important to do some sort of a warm-up or stretching, breathing exercises, etc. before you get into the main event. Similarly, think of the reading a textbook as the main event. And the muscles that you're using is your brain. You're using your brain, your mind, your eyes, right? Before you start getting right into the chapter. I mean, that's what most students do. That's what I did for a big chunk of college. If it's chapter 3, go to chapter 3, start reading. Before you do that, one of the best things to do is to read the front matter of a textbook. In this case, our textbook, the front matter just really consists of a preface. So it's the stuff that the authors write that's not really included in the chapters. It's stuff that they write that they want you to know, you, the reader of the book. I highly, highly recommend that you read that kind of stuff. It'll say preface or intro or something like that. It's the authors talking about themselves or the book or the material and that kind of thing. You have a better idea of what's going on. Anyhow, when it's a chapter by chapter kind of thing, before you start reading, before you start diving right into the chapter, a lot of textbooks will have like chapter preview or chapter outline or the objectives you hope to gain from this chapter for different courses that you take. I highly recommend read through that. That's the first thing you do. Read that stuff. Our textbook doesn't really have that type of thing, but you might just read the very first paragraph, the first section. That's the first thing you read. Or for our textbook, the very first thing you can do, read the chapter summary. It sounds like it's kind of backwards thinking, but if the very first thing you read is a chapter summary, now you have an idea. You have a very, very concise, short understanding of what the chapter is about. So read the summary first, and then go back and maybe read that first paragraph. But before you get into the main thing, also go through the whole chapter. Read the headings and subheadings and subheadings. You don't have to read into the text, but just practice like reading through. Just get your brain familiar with all the different headings and subheadings. Or if you see a comic that stands out to you, read the comic and maybe meditate on what that might mean and how that's related to the rest of the chapter. So doing all those things, read the summary first, read the intro, read the headlines, read the headings and subheadings and so forth. That's giving you a very focused sort of lens and way in which you can observe the chapter. And now when you go to actually read the chapter, you're going to have an increase in your comprehension. Statistically speaking, doing this type of thing, doing reading exercises, reading warm-ups and whatnot, that systematically will increase your comprehension and also decrease the amount of time because you really know what to focus on as it relates to the main chapter. So that's a warm-up, right? And that it might sound like a lot, but I was just being really thorough. That might only take you 5 minutes. It might take you 3 minutes. It might take you 10 minutes. It just depends on the chapter, depends on the book, depends on the topic that you're reading. So that's that. And then write in the textbook. When you get thoughts, this is my opinion. This is my suggestion. This is what I did as a college student. I was a college student for 12 years at several colleges. I just got to the point where I write in the textbook. underline things, I highlight things, I write in the margins, and all that kind of stuff. There's writing everywhere, and that way um, I understand the material that much better because I read stuff and then I think, how does that relate to other things that I know or something that I saw in a movie, film, etc., relationships. All those types of things are going to help you understand the material better. These lectures that I'll provide for videos, I'm only covering so many things throughout the chapter. I can't cover everything from the chapter, but I'll cover the things and go over things that I want to highlight, that I really want to emphasize. I'll provide some videos for you to watch along the way, and so on and so forth. So that's that. So make sure, I think I already mentioned, make sure you have the PowerPoint presentation for chapter 1. Make sure you're following along as you're listening to this lecture. I'm trying to basically simulate the public or the classroom experience, right? This is what I would do in a classroom, have a PowerPoint up, talk to you, go through the slides, so on and so forth. So that's my logic and psychology behind this, is I'm trying to simulate as much as possible a physical classroom. Okay, let's move on to the second slide. It says argument is a form of communication. So communication has the definition of communication is sort of a living document. It's sort of a living definition. It's like an ongoing, evolving definition. It's always kind of changing. One is that it's the process through which the social fabric of relationships, groups, organizations, and societies is created and maintained. Right, we use words and symbols and ideas to basically do life, to make society work. Right, we have to use communication. Theory, it's important to understand the concept of theory, not specific theories. Within our textbook, we'll cover a number of theories, like a specific theory. Let's say elaboration likelihood model. ELM is elaboration likelihood model. Some of you may have heard of that. It's something that's in this textbook. It's part of a lot of different communication courses that you might take, or other non-communication courses as well. But the point is, that's a specific theory. And what I'm talking about here is just theory in general. So a more general, broad view of theory. It's any systematically related set of ideas used to describe and or explain phenomena. So we're talking about things in our environment, at least from my background, things in our social environment, messages, words, behaviors, emotions, all that kind of stuff. So things that are extraordinary. We're looking at phenomena that we can study scientifically, things that are systematically related, right? They're not random. It's all strategic. There's two different types of theory, right? There's folk theory and scientific theory. Folk theory is you make observations, you generate hypotheses, predictions. A lot of times it's anecdotal. You probably have done this or do this on a regular basis, or at least you're aware of it. You observe people, right? Maybe you're people watching, or you're watching a movie, and then you start to sort of make these theories. You make these predictions about what may or may not happen based on a variety of reasons. You do that in your relationships. If you're with a friend or a family member, or you're with a close other, you might be talking about other people, and you start articulating and talking about these are observations that you've made about these two people, and you say, oh, this is what I think is going to happen. This is what I think it means. That's folk theory. Now, scientific theory is very similar, but it's a lot more strategic. It's a lot more structured. There are quantitative statistical analyses that we have to follow, or statistical analyses statistical tests that are used to measure the outcomes of our ideas, of our observations. And then based upon what we find through scientific theory, through scientific argument, based on what we find, we can support an argument. Right? We make hypotheses, and then if our hypotheses are positively and or strongly supported by the outcomes of the data that we've gathered from these statistical tests, then we can say, hey, this is a strong argument that accounts for some sort of phenomenon, right? So that's speaking about theory in a very broad term. So oftentimes scientific theory comes from folk theory. I have an idea about how relationships work. I worked with someone who he just had a lot of really, really good ideas about human relationships, and he would test those ideas, and then he would submit it to a journal, and then he'd get a publication out of it. He is a workhorse. But it started with things like he was holding his wife's hand one day. He was walking with his wife and he was holding her hand and he thought, I wonder how people perceive our relationship based on the way that we're holding hands. So that's how his experiment started. It started with an observation, with an idea. He turned it into a scientific theory or into a scientific model, conducted an experiment, a survey, and then had all kinds of interesting data and outcome. So there's real consequences for the ways that we think about theory and for the things that we do. On one of these next slides, slide 6, you see there's the YouTube link, a video that should be able to play directly into this PowerPoint. And this is an example of how a real life example of how a folk theory, an anecdotal argument, turned into a very detailed scientific experiment which had real consequences. So this is Robert Rosenthal talking about the Pygmalion effect, an experiment that was done, essentially called the Pygmalion effect. He's discussing this experiment that was done several years ago. I want to say it was maybe back in the 60s or 70s. I don't remember. It's a very controversial experiment because of the way the experiment was done. So if you're listening to this video and you're thinking, man, that doesn't sound right, that seems unfair. You're right. It's unfair and it's highly unethical, but pay attention to how he explains things. Basically, this idea that we can have these ideas, we turn them into a scientific theoretical model, and we test them in an environment. In this case, for this example, it's in an actual classroom, and it had real consequences. Those ideas, those theories had unique effects on students' learning achievements. So that's just one example to illustrate sort of the power and magnitude of scientific theory. So the whole scientific theory, you make predictions, design methods, collect your data, you analyze the data, you write about it, you submit it to a journal or something like that, and then you revise your theory, you revise your ideas, you revise the theoretical approach that you take to that thing. So that's theory. On to the transactional model of communication. We're on slide 8. So this is the basic model of communication. You get a sender, receiver, message, channel, feedback, interference, noise. All those different things affect the overall process of the communication. Right? I'm a sender. I generate a message, and then I send that message to you through some sort of a channel. Maybe it's a text message or an email or just a spoken word. Then you're the receiver. You decode the message, make sense out of it, you give me feedback, right? And then I do the same thing for you. I make sense out of your message, and then I give you feedback, and you make sense out of my message, and you give me feedback. It's called the feedback loop, right? And when we're doing that, when we're engaging in a conversation, that's the co-creation of meaning. We're actually in real time. We're like contributing to our future relationships. Now, this is pretty trivial if we're talking about something like, hey, what do you want to have for dinner? I don't know. What'd you have last night? Pizza. Okay, how about something else tonight? Okay, yeah, that's the model of communication. But let's say as it pertains to this class in argumentation, if I'm making an argument, I'm making a factual argument, or let's say I'm making a policy argument, a policy claim, meaning if I'm telling you, I think you should do this, I think you should stop doing this, I think we should take a break, I think you should spend less time seeing this person or that person, I think you should change these behaviors. Right? When we talk about things that are a little bit more heavy, more heady, now we're talking about a very complex understanding of how this model of communication works. The context affects everything. Where conversation takes place, that affects the way that I think and it affects the way that you think generally. So whether we're talking in my car or in a coffee shop or in church or on the beach or the time of the day, or there's emotional noise and physical noise, etc. All those things can affect the way that I engage in communication, especially when it comes to argumentation, where things can get a little bit heated at times. So there's the slide 9 says the transactional communication, right? We're talking about this co-creation of meaning. We're creating a shared future reality with each other. So you don't have to fully understand this concept of conduit metaphor. If you really want to understand conduit metaphor, you can look up Reddy's article from 1979. It's really long and dense and meaty. But he has this idea that our thoughts relate to words, and then those words, when spoken, create more thoughts in other people and mine as well, and that leads to more words, conversation, interaction, communication, ad infinitum. So that's kind of like this process of meaning. I have thoughts, and I try to convey them to you. You have to use words to convey them to you. The our language, human language, words is a conduit. That's sort of the analogy. It's a conduit to transfer meaning. Conduit is something that acts as a channel for the transmission of something. So hopefully that kind of helps you understand the nature of meaning, right? Humans can't read minds. I have to use words and other forms of communication, like nonverbal communication. I have to use that in order to get you to understand anything that I'm thinking in my head. I can't just transfer the thoughts in my mind and put them in your head, right? At least not yet. You never know what the future holds with AI. Just kidding. So the next one is on argument as a form of communication. A lot of people, including myself, from time to time, maybe more for some than others, we struggle to appropriately communicate as a result of things like a disagreement, a frustration. Something leads to an upset state of mind, or creates sadness or anger. We have a difference of opinion, right? We don't see eye to eye on things. And when people are getting along and agreeing on everything, that's great. Things are easy. But when there's not, that's when it can be challenging to communicate appropriately. One reason is through passive aggressiveness. So that next slide 11, there's a video in there that provides you a pretty detailed and concise explanation of passive aggressive behavior. So I recommend to go ahead and pause this video and watch that video, take some notes, and think about how that relates to your own experience. How do you relate to passive aggressive behavior, either as the aggressor or as a victim? Most of us have been the aggressor, and then also have experienced the role of victim through passive aggressive behavior. Bottom line, it's ineffective. It deviates from what is considered competent communication, and it's in general pretty toxic. It's a fairly toxic form of behavior. Okay, argumentation development, it begins early. From a very early age, humans have a very interesting disposition and understanding of their social world. When a baby's born, they don't yet quite fully have knowledge of their hand control. In other words, they don't really they're not consciously aware of the fact that they're in control of their hand. If you have children, or you've been around small babies, maybe you know what I'm talking about. But there comes a certain point in time when a baby starts to realize that they're in control of their hand. And it's kind of cute and crazy because you see these babies as they're going through this transition. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm in control of this. I can do this. I can use my hand now and pull things, pull hair. That sounds good. Take food, throw it at the wall. We develop this sort of understanding, like, wow, I'm in control of this thing. I'm in control of these things. So how does that relate to argumentation? Is that from a very early age, we start developing these different levels of conscious awareness of different components of our social environment, whether it's hand control, nature versus nurture. Some people, some babies are just more adept at controlling things in their environment than others. Part of it's just fostered by their environment as well. Argumentation is a developmental process. Think about the top of our textbook. Arguing, reasoning, and thinking well. I have it backwards there. So humans don't really fully understand why they do certain things until they do, right? And part of that is just because we're developing, right? We're always developing. That would be my argument, is that as humans, we're always developing, but especially the first, 15 years of our lives. For young kids, for 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, they might be thinking, why do I wash my hands, right? Well, it's always sort of a battle to get our kids to wash their hands, more so for our 4-year-old son, right? The reason why they wash their hands is because we've trained them to, right? We have trained them to. They don't yet fully understand the concept of germs and bacteria and all that kind of stuff, and how that can make you sick if you put your hands in your mouth and if you touch other things. They're not quite there yet, right? But at some point, kids will get that. They understand, like, oh, okay, I wash my hands because my hands have dirt on them and they carry germs. The concept of fairness, right? babies really don't really have a concept of fairness, but at some point you start getting it. Kids start understanding the difference between right and wrong, and that's a process that it's a process that continues to grow throughout your life. And the more that you understand the difference between right and wrong, the different your disposition changes towards the things like argumentation and using evidence and people who are opinionated and whatnot. We talk about presenting reasons to your parents for requests. So this is a course on argumentation. You're going to learn about the concept of an argument and how to engage in argumentation. You start doing this when you're really, really young. Sort of like it's just part of our DNA, right? To try to get what we want. But one of the main things is that it's always in our best interest to provide a reason for a request. If I just said, "Hey, can I have another cookie?" No, you already had dessert. This is something that my daughter would do quite a bit. She would have some dessert after dinner, and she'd say, "Hey, can I have another cookie?" And I would say, "No, you already had dessert." And then she would kind of look at me and say, like, "It's just a small cookie." And she's so cute. And then I'm thinking, okay, that's a good argument, right? It's not like she's having another really large dessert, another really large cookie. She wants a little extra something. She knows I said no. She knows that she's not supposed to have more, but she's like, "Well, hey, look, it's really small." So she's like arguing with me, but in a way that's useful, and oftentimes it would work. As you got older, you probably realized you had to up the ante, right? I don't want just an extra cookie. Now I want money. Now I want clothes. I want a computer. I want a car. So maybe as you gotten older, you're thinking of like all the things that you've done or maybe failed to do to get your parents or other people to comply with your requests. So you might say, think of the benefits. If you bought me a car, mom and dad, or whoever might buy you a car, think of all the benefits that I could have, that you could have if I have this car, right? We like to give reasons to get things done because we respond to that as humans. Presenting reasons for requests is really important. Think of how you feel as a kid or at any age. If you ask permission for something and the response is no, why? Just because, or no, you can't have that. Why? Because I said so. Now, a lot of parents do that, and if you're a parent or if you have parents who have said that, I'm not shaming them. But what I am saying is, like, sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes my children need to listen to me. Like if they're running towards the street, get out of the street. That's not an opportunity for us to engage in argumentation. But most of the time, when my kids, if I said no to something and they asked why, I want to give them a reason. Because humans respond well to reasons. When we're given reasons for things, we understand them better. It doesn't mean that we always will say yes or say, doesn't mean that we're going to do something differently, but at least we understand. So I'll explain things to my 4-year-old son in a way that I would explain to a college student. And I know like he's not fully comprehending everything, but maybe he's getting 20% of it. Still it's something. There's so we'll just kind of reflect on why people want a reason. Why do you think we want reasons to do things? There's a classic experiment done years ago where people would try to cut in line for the copy machine. And the way it was done was you had one person who wasn't part of the experiment. They were on the copy machine, and then you had a few different conditions. One condition was a person would go up and say, "Can I cut in line for the copy machine?" That's one version. Another one was, "Can I cut in line for the copy machine because I need to make copies and I'm running late for a meeting?" And then another option was, "Can I cut in line for the copy machine because I need to make copies?" So the two that were most effective were the ones that contained the word because. If I just said, "Can I cut in line for the copy machine?" and I didn't give you a reason, you might say yes, but you might also be like, "Why? Like, why would I do that?" Like, no, you can do it. You can do it when I'm done. But the difference between saying I need to make copies because I'm running late versus just using the word because. Can I cut in line for the copy machine because I need to make copies? I mean, think about it. You're not really saying anything interesting or new. You're just stating the obvious. Can I cut in line for the copy machine because I need to make copies? Well, of course that's why you need to be in the copy machine. But the point is, we're sort of programmed as humans that when we hear the word because, we expect a reason after that. Sometimes it's a good reason, sometimes it's not a good reason. So when someone is explaining something to you, And they say, because pay attention to the next words that come out of your mouth, that come out of their mouth, because it might be a good reason, or they might just be saying the same thing. Like, can I cut in line for the copy machine? Why? Because I need to make copies. Like, well, obviously. But is there a better reason? Yeah, I'm running late for a meeting. Okay, that's a really good reason. Anyhow, that's that. Argument has been, next slide, argument has been falsely compared to or mistaken for verbal hostility. A lot of times when people say, like, yeah, we got into an argument, they just automatically assume that's a bad thing. Fighting is bad. Fighting is a toxic behavior, but argument is not. The authors talk about angry argument, which is blustering and threats have replaced reason and rationality. So if you're engaged in an argument and you say, like, yeah, that's me, blustering and threats, then it's not really, I mean, you might call it an angry argument, but it's also just easier to call it bad fighting, right? It's fighting, it's toxic, it's unhealthy, not a whole lot gets accomplished, emotions rise up. But this course in this textbook is intended to teach you about a formal way of engaging in argument. So the primary goals of the book, this course, is to understand argumentation and to improve it, to improve your ability at arguing. To argue appropriately and competently, to improve your reasoning, the way that you make sense out of things, the way that you make sense out of evidence, out of newspaper articles, out of documentaries, out of movies, out of things that you hear your friends and family say, improve your critical thinking, etc. Those are the primary goals. Good question on the next slide. What is critical thinking? A lot of people don't really know that. We hear that term a lot, like, oh, the person lacks critical thinking, or we really need to bring critical thinking back, yada, yada, yada. So just pause for a moment and reflect on what you think critical thinking is. Maybe and just like pause the video and then take some notes. Like, what do I think critical thinking is? Because that's a big part of this class. The next slide has a video. Again, I would say pause this video and then watch this video on critical thinking. It's pretty short, but it does a pretty good job of providing like a comprehensive yet very concise overview of critical thinking. And a lot of what you see in this video is what we talk about in this course. It's asking lots of questions. It's part of it. It's asking good questions. So what's the tree picture all about? Sometimes when we get so wrapped up into a conversation, into emotions, into things, we kind of just lose the ability to see the forest for the trees. So try to see the forest for the trees, especially in this world we live in right now with all the things going on in politics and restrictions because of a virus and just the way that life is. It's easy to be so caught up in things that you fail to acknowledge the fact that you're in a forest, right? Hence, some people miss the forest for the trees. So try to see the forest for the trees. Stop, pause, literally like smell the roses. Oftentimes when I'm gardening and I'm pruning roses, I'll smell the roses. Not so much because I'm like, I really want to smell the roses, but it's an intentional thing to do. It's not about the roses. It's not about the smell. It's about like taking the time to appreciate the thing that's right in front of your face. And of course, if it smells good, it smells good, right? Or if it's a tree, or if it's an animal, or whatever. Like, how does that relate to critical thinking? How does that relate to this class? It's related in the sense that if you want to get really good at arguing, you really have to like focus on the issue at hand. What is the issue at hand? What is the evidence being presented? Like, you really have to kind of dig deep about whatever it is the topic is with regards to your argumentation experience. The authors provide all these argument functions. Like, what's the point? Like how does argument function? There's advocacy, defensive function, sensitivity function. Advocacy, state your case. You have a position on something. You have an attitude towards something. You're an advocate on a certain topic, and someone says, well, hey, state your case. Like, why are you so passionate about this topic or that thing? Now it's your opportunity to use argumentation to articulate some sort of an argument. Defensive. Sometimes you need to have more of a defensive approach. If you're feeling attacked in a psychological way, or someone's attacking maybe something that you said, the defensive function, you're protecting your mind, your thoughts, your cognitions, your reputation, your emotions, right? So if you understand argument well, then you can learn how to defend yourself. And honestly, sometimes one of the easiest ways to defend yourself is just by asking a simple question. How did you know that? How did you come up with that idea? Do you have any evidence to support that opinion? Right? And some of those types of really basic questions can really shut a person down, because oftentimes people will just assert all these things without actually having any idea what they're talking about. So if you said something like, "Do you have any evidence to support that opinion?" They might say, "No." And it's like, in my opinion, it's like, okay, well, then it's just your opinion. Sensitivity also is a function, helps you to engage in perspective taking, to know what it's like to be on the other side, right? Um, and then there's the citizen participation function. What the authors are talking about here is like, hey, it's good to be an informed citizen. It's good to just to know what's going on in our world, and to be aware of, let's say with a specific topic like COVID or COVID vaccines, it's good to understand the details of those things. That way you can be an informed citizen. If you were to create an argument or provide an argument, you know better at how to basically work with that. Just today, actually, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a nurse, and she was telling me some of the like the scientific details and components and nuances of this COVID vaccine, and I was kind of like, I had no idea. I didn't know that was like that. And I'm not talking about any private information. It's what she's telling me is public knowledge. It's just I hadn't heard about that. But anyhow, um, this next slide has a video from Jimmy Kimmel, and it's one of those funny videos where they ask people on the street questions that they should know, right? If you're an informed citizen, you should know these things, and they didn't know them, and it's sort of like the subtext is like, oh man, people aren't very smart, because they don't know the state capitals or something like that. Which, I mean, I think Jimmy Kimmel is just having fun with this thing. But also, it also illustrates how, in general, it's good to be an informed citizen. And if you're not an informed citizen, if you don't know all the state capitals or the state abbreviations, it's not the end of the world. But anyways, just something to make you laugh. And the last one, last function, it's fun, right? The fun function, or just the function, however you want to say it. So the authors talk about this idea that engaging in an argument can be fun. It can be fun in the sense that it's intellectually stimulating, and it's almost like, well, it's not so much that I don't necessarily like arguing, but I like things that are intellectually stimulating. So if that's what gets me to that thing, if an argument gets me to that point of like having a very intellectual conversation and an intellectually stimulating conversation, then one might say that was fun. That's not really me. I don't really like arguing unless I have to, unless I need to. But some people do like that. So that's another thing to think about when it comes to being offended by others, or taking things the wrong way. In other words, some people, they just like to argue, not because they want to be right. Some people like to argue. Some people just think they're right all the time, and that's not what I'm talking about. Some people enjoy the process of this song and dance of arguing about certain topics. And the ones who can do it in a way that's neutral, where they're not attacking you, then they're doing it, usually they do it pretty well. But that's just one way to think about arguing. So on this last slide, this is one of those things that I would do in class with you if we were in a classroom. But all of these activities that you would do in a classroom, in my opinion, they should be for your own enrichment and your own for your own benefit, your own enrichment, for your own further enhanced understanding of course material. So I would say this, once you're done listening to this, engage in this, try to complete this activity, this exercise. There's no points associated with it, obviously, but spend a few minutes just thinking about a time that you had an argument with a close other. Close other is to be a family, a friend, someone that you see on a regular basis, right? A human, specifically. So you can just do this in your head, or you can do it with a friend if you want to just sort of like, it can be cathartic. It can be really sort of cathartic to talk through something that has happened in the past, especially if it was an argument that didn't end well. So maybe you just talk about the context. If it was an argument that you initiated, what reasons did you present? If it was an argument the other person initiated, what did they present? What was the logic behind everything going on? How did the argument play out? Like, give me a play-by-play, or yourself, right? This is all for your own benefit. And then how were emotions a factor? So the whole point of this is just to get you to reflect on your personal experience with a general argument that's happened, somewhat recently. I recommend that you do that, but again, you don't have to. So hopefully this was useful. You had a good. I gave you a good amount of information about how to approach reading the textbook in general and just the concept of theory. And then we just kind of briefly went over some of the aspects and components from chapter 1. I hope you're all doing well, and that is about it. I'll talk to you later.